is Katie Martin of Harvest Goods Company, and today we are going to be stitching this design called Field of Wildflowers. And I just love it so much. It's so adorable. So let's go ahead and get started. Make sure we have all of your materials gathered. If you bought our kit, you have everything you need. If you just bought our pattern, I'm going to show you exactly what you need. You need a Harvest Goods small hoop. It's a 4.5 inch hoop, so you could use a 4-inch hoop or a 5-inch hoop. A friction pin, a pair of embroidery snips, your floss, and there are 3 different fabrics and 2 different needles. So the fabrics are a piece of natural linen, sage cotton, and sky blue cotton. And I'll show you what to do with these, so don't stress. And I love to use a pair of fabric scissors, but these aren't totally required. First, what you're going to want to do is trace on the circle and the clouds and the mountain line to the blue fabric, and then the mountain line and the field line onto your linen fabric, and then the field with all the details onto your green fabric. And then I'm just cutting all these out and leaving extra fabric on the ends. And you can see here I've got them all laid on top of each other. This really is the trickiest part, is just getting these lined up just right, which is why I included this circle on the pattern. So make sure your circles are all lined up and lay your fabric pieces on top of the back of your hoop, and then go ahead and use the top of your hoop and just pop it over like you would if you were just using one piece of fabric. Really don't overthink it. Your fabric is going to come up a bit, but don't worry. We're going to tack it down with our stitches, and you can just shimmy it and tighten it a little bit, but just know these pieces of fabric aren't going to be totally smooth until they're all the way stitched down. So you're just going to want to make sure that your blue fabric is so tight that when you tap it, it sounds like a drum. Again, sage and linen fabrics are going to be a little bit bumpy, and that's totally fine, but you want to make sure your hardware is cinched down as hard as you can get it. You want it to be super tight, and you don't want this fabric moving around very much. Make sure you're putting each layer where it goes according to the design. So you'll see that they're stacked in a certain way, and they're supposed to line up in a certain way. If you don't get this just right, it's completely fine. This is a really flexible pattern. So let's get stitching. So we're going to go ahead and cut the excess fabric around our hoop. This is going to make stitching so much easier, especially because we have 3 fabrics we're working with. I'm just leaving about 1.5 inches around the hoop. Only do this when your design is exactly where you want it to be, because you really can't go back now. I'm pretty locked in here. I stitched it a few times and it was a little bit different every time, but still really cute each time. You have 2 needle options, but we're going to go ahead and be using our smaller needle. We're going to start off with 2 strands of the cream floss. I love using 2 strands here because it gives it a bit of a pop, but it's still really delicate. So you're going to go ahead and split stitch along the edge of the left mountain range, so not the field but on the linen. And this is going to also tack down your fabric and make your design a little more stable. So here I'm just adding in my first stitch, and I'm going to just go ahead and stitch all along those lines, and it might fray. You can see this design frayed, but it adds texture, and I actually really love how it looks. But if you're particularly struggling with fraying, you can, right here I'm doing a back split stitch, so I'm going a stitch length away and coming back to the last stitch. But if that's not working for you, you can split through your previous stitch to create the next stitch, and you'll see me switch back and forth doing that depending on how the fabric is responding. Go ahead and enjoy that. It's really meditative and should take a while to get that mountain range stitched down. Tie off your floss, and then we're going to be using 3 strands of the blue floss. And first you're going to want to tack down that back mountain just with some running stitches along the edge of the mountain. All you're going to do is satin stitch to fill in the space. Also a diagram in your pattern that shows you specifically the angles that I stitched in. Stitch along the edge of the green fabric just like you did with the cream floss on the linen. It's the exact same idea. We're using the exact same stitch, and this green fabric will pucker, and you can see that I am tightening it just a little bit once I get it all the way stitched down. You can see that I have a little bit of linen showing out the back. This is no worries. We can cover that up in a few different ways, or like what I'm doing here, I'm fraying it so it adds a little bit of balance. Really, whatever you want to do, it's totally up to you. And then here you see I'm going back and I am just tidying up that back blue mountain. I'm using 2 strands of blue floss here just because I'm not filling in such a big area, and these are a little more detail oriented, and I'm making sure they're tucked in behind that green fabric, but I'm just filling in that gap that I left and making sure it's all looking cohesive. Next, we're going to go ahead and stitch these little lines in the field. And how we're going to do that is we're going to use 2 strands of the green floss. These little stitches are just very short straight stitches, and these just give the piece a bit of movement and a bit of depth and interest. And it's something that I love to use in a lot of different ways. And sorry for my nail here, of course, right while I'm filming. So go ahead and add all of those little green stitches, and then we're going to switch to 1 strand of the green floss. And you can see here that I've stitched most of these little flower stems, but here's an example of me doing a set. These are just 1 strand straight stitches that all meet in a general point. They don't have to all meet in the exact same spot, but they're almost create little bunches, and they fan out just a little bit at the tops. So go ahead and fill in all these spaces. We're just building layers. So next we are going to stitch those little florals that you see here. These are using 3 strands of cream floss, 3 strands of yellow floss, and 1 strand of the red floss. The idea is to create little umbels or fans around the stems, making sure that you're giving a balanced amount of the white, yellow, and red. I actually used a bit less red throughout than the white or yellow. Next, we're going to go ahead and move on to the clouds, and we're going to switch to our bigger needle here and the yarn. And I love embroidering clouds with yarn. I just think it's so fun, and that makes them so fluffy and textured. So go ahead and thread the yarn just like you would thread your needle with embroidery floss. It's the exact same idea. And what you're going to do is go ahead, fill in that small cloud with horizontal stitches. So see, I'm just using a basic satin stitch, and it doesn't have to be a certainly perfect satin stitch. It could just be long and short stitch. It can be pretty messy because clouds have a lot of texture. But you can see here I'm just filling in the general area, and then at the top I'm going to make it a little bit more fluffy. So I start piling stitches on at the top of this cloud. And that's how you create the dimension with the yarn. You just keep stitching over it over and over again. I like to add 2 or 3 layers of yarn over top my base layer where I like things to be extra puffy. And next we're going to go ahead and stitch this really big cloud. It's the same idea. Gonna go ahead and stitch the base horizontally, and you can see that I'm not even really using satin stitch here because it's so long. I'm doing more of long and short stitch here. But however you want to fill it in and add texture is totally fine. The fun things about clouds is that they all look different, so there's no pressure to make this look exactly a certain way. Finally, I'm going to go ahead and make sure there's no touch-ups I want to do, and if I'm happy with my piece, I just trim the back of my hoop. Any crazy flyaways, I always leave my hoop butts messy and open in the back. I just like them this way, and I've never been a huge fan of crazy backings, but if you have a way you love to back your hoop, absolutely do it. I just like to run a running stitch around the excess fabric, and as I make all the way around the hoop, I like to my floss to start on the inside and end on the inside of the fabric. That way when I pull it tight, my knot is on the inside instead of the outside. And this just makes it a little bit easier to tie. So go ahead and tighten that up and tie a double or a triple knot. Make sure it's really tight and secure. And then you are done. You did it.